So for the past 6 weeks, what we've been doing here at IMCC, for those of you who maybe haven't been here in a while or in recent weeks, we've been taking a look at the Eightfold Path. And many of you know that that, of course, is the Buddha's fourth noble truth. And this is actually week 6, so we're up to that 6th path tonight. We tend to talk about the Eightfold Path the way we talk about many things in our culture, which is in a linear fashion, as though we move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. But actually, when we speak about the Eightfold Path, maybe a more useful way to think about it is as an 8-lane highway. And you're going to be accessing and using all 8 lanes. So it's not like the rungs of a ladder where we're doing this one, and now we're going to this rung, and now we're up there. And not only is it an 8-lane road, but it is in circular shape, so that it's much like maybe a racetrack, where you're circling around and around, and you're changing lanes. So, but because we have to explain it and develop some concepts about it, we put it in this linear fashion of speaking about one path per week over the course of these 8 weeks. Actually, it's 10 weeks, because we're going to, at the end, do a wrap-up, a conclusion with a panel of many of the teachers who will have taught during that 8-week period. So what we're doing is we started with wise view, and that's where we're going to end up. That's part of that 8-lane road we're traveling, circle that we're traveling. And one of the things that we're starting with is looking directly at the nature of suffering, or unsatisfactoriness, however you want to frame it. And I thought I'd read to you from a book by Ayakima. It's entitled, Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. Being Nobody, Going Nowhere. So this is an excerpt from her book on this concept of suffering. And she says, and she begins with a quote from the Buddha, who said, "Birth is suffering, decay is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what one wants is suffering." Anybody identify with all those? Okay. So these are the main aspects, but then there are others that arise between birth, decay, death, and disease. We obviously have our good days when there isn't any suffering. And we may be sorry for somebody who is suffering, but we're glad that we're not experiencing it. We forget that there's suffering everywhere all the time. It exists even in pleasure, because we can't make pleasure last, much as we'd like to hold on to it. This body of ours can't even sustain life unless it's constantly fed, cleaned, exercised, and repaired. All sorts of repairs are necessary. You might see which one of these you've dealt with. Glasses, teeth, hearing aids, tonics, vitamins, cough syrup, shampoos, powders, and lotions. Millions of dollars are spent just to keep the body going, not even to improve it, just to keep it going. One can't make it any younger, even though many people try. All this effort, energy, money, and time is expended just to keep the body functioning. And unless we do expend this effort, the body will completely disintegrate. We might not even be able to use it anymore. Its inherent nature of not listening to our pleas for please. Youth, could we have a little youth? Could we have beauty, long life, health? But instead, doing exactly the opposite can certainly be regarded as suffering. The greatest suffering of the body is its many demands, which most people will spend all their lives trying to satisfy. All the money we make, all the work we do is to keep the body intact and satisfied. We have to work to get food, a house, clothing, medicine. We wouldn't need any of that if we didn't have a body. Most people spend a lot of trying to get a little more comfortable and a little more satisfaction for the body. And we don't end there. It's not just the body, it's the mind too, and haven't we noticed that? It won't listen to, we say, well, stay here, think about this, but it won't listen. It does what it pleases instead of staying right where we want it to. It continues to think about things that have a tendency to make us unhappy. If that isn't suffering, what is? So that's where we start with this nature of life. There is suffering. Just is. The good thing about it, turn and look at it a little differently, is that it's really our best teacher because it hangs on to us and it keeps us in its grip until we have learned a particular lesson. Life is really just an ongoing adult education class. On and on. The Eightfold Path says that if we can restrain ourselves in particular ways, or I like to think about maybe taking the S out of that word and retrain ourselves so that we can begin to see things a little bit differently. And if you were to speak about the Eightfold Path from a psychological point of view, you could say that the path is a way to change the patterns of thought and behavior that create this suffering for us. So again, this is from the Dhamma. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you, as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. So, whatever type of universe we create, what we choose to plant, what we bring forth in the garden of our heart, will create our future. So, again, if you've missed some of the preceding Tuesday evening nights, I'm going to give you just a real brief review of the Eightfold Path. It's divided into 3 subgroups, and the first one is a subgroup of 2 paths that have to do with the wisdom factors of intention and discernment. Discernment is how I view the world. What concepts do I experience as true? Intention has to do with a priority of noticing, like what are we paying attention to? What's my resolve in living in this world? Is it kindness? Is it harmlessness? What's my intention? So that's the first subgroup, the wisdom factors. The second subgroup has 3 components, and they all have to do with virtue and energy. Wise speech, wise action, and wise livelihood that Sharon spoke about last week. We could say that the first 2, view and intention, are the steering mechanism for where and how we are going to direct our energy in the moral conduct of those 3 virtues I just listed. Intentions move us into the actions that follow our conscious or sometimes our unconscious inclinations. And our actions tend to come from what we really want, not necessarily what we say we want. It's what we really want. And they really can't be prescribed and they can't be simulated by us. A wise speech, the third path, has to do with my relationship to articulating what I'm thinking, what my thoughts are. And again, what do I really want? Am I going to abstain from lying or malicious speech or divisive speech or abusive speech or harsh speech? And by the way, what are those kinds of speaking? And what about something like idle chatter? What's my relationship to speaking those thoughts? The fourth path is wise action, and that would be about one's relationship to the precepts, for example, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. What are your intentions, actions with that? The fifth path is wise livelihood. And there's a notion that not only does it mean abstaining from a dishonest or harmful means of livelihood, but it has also to do with the challenges of a work life, or even just the busyness of our everyday lives, our daily activities. What, in fact, is wise living? The last group of the Eightfold Path has 3 components, and they're all related to concentration. It's called samadhi in the Pali language. And those are wise effort, the topic of tonight's talk, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. So, wise effort. Simply stated, we could say that wise effort is about doing what's wise and not doing what's unwise. Very simple. Here's how the Buddha framed wise effort. And I'm quoting now, and I'm going to substitute a couple of words for his language. But he says, here the monk, we're going to substitute the worldling, that's us, we're worldlings. Here the worldling arises her will, puts forth effort, generates energy, exerts her mind, and strives to prevent the arising of evil and unwholesome mental states that have not yet arisen. She arouses her will and strives to eliminate evil and unwholesome mental states that have already arisen. She arouses her will and strives to generate wholesome mental states that have not yet arisen. She arouses her will, puts forth effort, generates energy, exerts her mind, and strives to maintain wholesome mental states that have already arisen, to keep them free of delusion, to develop, increase, cultivate, and perfect them. This is called right or wise effort. So again, basically it's how to avoid and overcome unwholesome or unskillful qualities, and how to develop and maintain the wholesome ones. So in the last section of the path that had to do with moral conduct or virtue, we're talking largely about outwardly physical qualities that are visible, can be seen. And now we're moving into this next section where we are working with training our minds. And basically that's our inner life. What are we doing with our minds and our hearts? As with the first 5 factors on the path, what guides us is the intention to avoid causing harm and to engage in what's beneficial for us and for others. And you might say that intention and effort, wise effort, are closely related because intention establishes a kind of energetic focus for what begins to manifest as effort. So notice that the first task is to discern what's skillful and what's unskillful, right? That's the first piece here. We have to abandon the first one and pursue the latter one. And when the word whatever is skillful, whatever is unskillful, the what here refers to the mental actions such as thoughts, feelings, impulses, states that arise in us. And of course these mental actions can be wholesome, they can be unwholesome, they can be distracted or restless, they can be anxious, fearful, hateful, envious, completely foggy. So it's the mental processes that we have going on all the time and that we're confronted with that really make the difference between peace and war, inside and outside ourselves. We have to ask this question: can we recognize whether this particular thought or impulse or feeling is helpful and beneficial? So in order to do that, we have to know what it is we're thinking, because sometimes we're so lost in a jumble of thoughts, there's no clear discernment about what's really going on. So one of the best places to start with this discernment is with a meditation practice where you can clearly notice what's going on in the mind, because you're not doing 5 other things simultaneously. And it can be very helpful to label what's going on in the mind. So you know that over the years of your own practice that you've probably been encouraged at one time or another to label what's going on. Thinking, planning, remembering, rehashing. This is the mind state of fear. This is anxiety. So we can begin to learn to discern what really is going on. Once we begin to see clearly, or more clearly, what thought or feeling is arising, then we can practice right effort in one of 4 ways. The first one is to prevent the arising of unwholesome. The second one is to overcome the arising of the unwholesome. So those 2 have to do with unwholesome arisings, thoughts, feelings, whatever. The third and the fourth ways to practice have to do with the wholesome. That is, the third one is to arouse wholesome states, feelings, or thoughts. And the fourth one is to maintain them once they have arisen. So again, we recognize what's unskillful. We abandon it by preventing it or overcoming it. And then we can choose to arouse or maintain whatever is skillful. And we'll say right here that these aren't just Buddhist practices. They're things that we have been learning throughout our lives, and I'll give you some examples. You've got a particular appointment that you need to get to on time. It's important, this appointment. You can prevent a lot of suffering if you give yourself plenty of time to get there. So that's a prevention of an unwholesome state of anxiety, right? We can overcome an unwholesome quality like impatience if we consciously bring the attention to the body. Just in doing that, often there is a sense of some ease arising. On the other side, when we're looking at how to cultivate the wholesome, if we notice a friend's helpfulness or assistance in some way, and we pay attention to the gratitude that comes with that, that's arousing some wise effort. If we're feeling some sense of calm and turmoil arises, and we can maintain that sense of calm with however we do that, then that is that fourth way of working with maintaining skillful or wise actions. And all of these efforts, what they're doing is that they're safeguarding and protecting the quality of the mind and the heart. Because our inner life, what's going on in this mind-body, is the most important asset that any of us have. So it deserves our care, deserves nurturing. Sometimes at the beginning of the practice, what we're doing is we're making some effort to corral some discipline in order to build this ability, both to discern and to deal with wholesome and unwholesome arisings. For example, we see that when we pay attention to our mind, we notice that our unconscious tendencies have a tendency to control our life. And that's just a great thing to sort of see. Stated another way, wise effort could be said like this: not to let an unwholesome thought arise that has not yet arisen. Not to let an unwholesome thought continue when it has arisen. So how many times do we get caught in some unwholesome thought, and we have some idea that this is not so wholesome, but it's such familiar territory that we have a tendency to just stay there, despite the discomfort, despite knowing that at some level this is not wholesome, but it feels familiar. So, a wise effort is also to make a wholesome thought arise, which is not yet arisen. So that might be, for example, the practice of metta, kindness for another. To make a wholesome thought continue, which has already arisen. So that one may be one that's a little more subtle. So we have to notice when the wholesome's here and what it is we can do to maintain it. So I'd like to invite you to just practice with this for a little bit in a guided meditation. So sit back in your chair, get comfortable, just relax. Allow the eyes to close if that's comfortable for you. Maybe begin with attention to the body. Let there be some ease, some softening. In the face, the jaw, the neck and the shoulders, the hands. And we'll begin with a reflection on this notion of preventing unwholesome from arising. So if you would just reflect for a moment on the states of mind or the trains of thought that you commonly experience that you really would be better off without. Maybe just think of one state of mind or one train of thought that commonly arises that you know you would be better off without. And you might consider under what circumstances this train of thought or this state of mind is most likely to occur. And what might you avoid in order to lessen the likelihood of this state of mind or train of thought occurring? Is there a way that you could avoid the circumstance that tends to bring this up? So you're just noticing this. You're not doing anything with it in terms of applying some course of action or not. You're just noticing what's true in this regard. And then pausing for a moment and letting go of this train of thought and coming back to the body, sitting here, feeling sit bones on the chair or the cushion. And for a moment to reflect upon this second way of dealing with unwholesome arisings. So for a moment, just imagine when you are experiencing some unskillful mental state, what are your preferred ways of overcoming it or causing it to go away? And do you consider this method to be healthy or unhealthy? Does the strategy come from wisdom or from aversion? And how does your wisdom, your inner wisdom that's right there inside, how does it cast light on the practice of overcoming or abandoning an unskillful state? So then opening the eyes, and just for a moment, if you would, think about those two aspects of wise effort, of both preventing and overcoming unskillful trains of thought. So one of the things that you might do is just notice what came up for you, or maybe in your own speaking or in your own listening, and you might form an intention around that for this next week in working with wise effort. I wish we had a little more time, because I'd love to do the piece on the next two, the arousing and the maintaining. But probably out of what you just did, you could translate that into, what can I cultivate to have the wholesome state be aroused, and then how might I maintain it? And you all have skills in this area, so it doesn't have to be this huge striving. Sometimes it's just ease in the body, softening the body. Yeah. So just to move on here, wise effort brings its own reward. It's almost instantaneous, but sometimes we don't notice it because we want something else. We're expecting something a little more tangible. Like, for example, we might say, I've been trying so hard and I still can't concentrate. So with a little clinging going on there. So letting go of that. I've been so loving to my kids, but they just don't appreciate it. Yeah, again, you sense the clinging there, the grasping. So wise effort, in order to be effective, has to be steady, and it is in itself the result, the practice over and over and over again. It's not dependent on some specific tangible thing that you say, oh, I'm there. That is a solidification of an expectation that we have about what wise effort is supposed to do for us, or where it's supposed to get us to. Sometimes wise effort is unskillful because it's framed in an unwise view of ourselves. We think we either have to get rid of something in this self, or we have to change the world, or we at least have to change the other person, convince them. This is a quote from an 8th century Indian Buddhist scholar who said, "We're not here to change the world is here to change us." So if we start with this idea that we're here to be changed, life can transform us through our willingness to be affected by it, to be tender toward it, to be receptive of it. The effort that we put forth will be an energy that's needed to listen, to learn, and to understand. So here we're talking about wise view that includes selflessness or no separation. And the notion is that what do we need to release in order to not feel separate, to have a sense of selflessness? And Rodney Smith, who's a teacher out on the West Coast, suggests that we might apply the 4 R's of wise effort. And he lists these as relax, release, relinquish, and rejoin. Because none of these words, relax, release, relinquish, or rejoin, none of them holds a kind of tension or stress or builds upon a story of me. These words represent moments of surrender, not acts of assertion. They allow us to fall back into our natural selves rather than make something of ourselves. So you see the distinction there between striving to make or do or create as opposed to just resting back in that innate natural goodness that's already here, that wisdom that resides within each of us. So we direct our effort towards relaxing, releasing, rejoining, toward inclusion and allowing. And then our projected discomfort with the world has a chance of ending, and the polarities of life are set aside for the sake of the common integrity of the whole. This is the beginning of effort toward interconnectedness. It's still self-focused, but the effort is more relaxed, the energy is calmer, and it's more steady. And in this case, the effort isn't focused on overcoming obstacles, but it's focused on letting go of resistance and bringing kindness to our perceived limitations. So we can investigate with questions like, what is this? Who am I? What's true? And when we do that, we begin to release our need to control our emotions, because influencing our experience interferes with the flow of this investigation. We see that we can settle back and experience what we are without striving to become. So paradoxically, this settling back and experiencing what we are without trying to become anything is rather effortless. So from this state of being, effortlessness, we can hear the truth of the Buddha's words. One insight is that effort is the basis of all suffering, that kind of striving effort. The other insight is that by the complete cooling and cessation of effort, no more stress is produced, no more suffering is produced. These are two insights. Grasp them together, and with energy, dedication, and care, you can expect one of two results. Every form of suffering grows out of effort. Eradicate effort, and no more suffering is produced. Consider the harmful consequence of effort that is the basis of suffering. But when all effort has been abandoned, there is freedom. There is the freedom of the effortless. So let me close with a poem. And again, if you'd like to close your eyes and sit back and listen. And it's entitled Memo to Self, Meditation. Right now, you don't have to parse the entire universe in infinite particulate detail. For just these few minutes, merely sit and become only breath. That is to say, spirit. Now, what you see is a world without you, as it was before you were born, and will be when you're no longer here. Are you amazed that it goes on without you? Slowly learn the lesson about who you are. Dust of the earth, dust of a star. The stuff that is you has always been here, fulfilling its purpose in losing itself until you. And now it's become a human body and brain. It believes it's an I and stands apart from the rest of creation, asserting its right to be Lord of all, whatever the price. But you know, in these moments, the price is too high, far more than our planet is able to pay. In your ego-fed effort to have it your way, you have become death, the destroyer of worlds. The world doesn't need you the way you need it. For these next few minutes, let go and just be. And become not an ego in charge of it all, but a part of the whole in search of your place. Thank you for your practice and for listening.